So, because I am an absolute glutton for punishment and I love arguing with people on the internet about white sage, let's get into how the hell we got here in the first place. And we need to know why. And I don't mean this to you, Dan. I'm just using your comment to go back. Maybe understanding why it's used by white people today might de-influence them from using it. First, we know that Native Americans used white sage even before anthropologists started studying them. And we know this through the records of the Spanish. We know this through the oral history of the Native Americans. We know this through archaeological evidence, and we know this through comparative ethnobotany. So we know that white sage was used by the Native Americans, and we know that it was used for things like purification to prepare before a ritual. It was used for signaling the ancestors, and it was also used for protection. Thing is, all of these things, the protection, the purification, the calling in the ancestors, this all requires connection to the spirits and to the ancestors. Now, the earliest records of white sage being documented by white people is with the anthropologist, American anthropologist, doing ethnographic studies on the indigenous people. One of the anthropologists who studied the Native Americans, did ethnographic studies with the Native Americans, would be like Francis Densmore, Charles Loomis, James Mooney. Smithsonian has a whole section on him. He even took photographs of the natives, and he does mention white sage, talks about the ceremonies and the smoke practices and things like that. And the plants are always described looking like white sage. There was one thing that James Mooney observed that was happening among the Native Americans across the tribes across the country, and it was called the Ghost Dance. Wrote a book called The Ghost Dance, hoping it would help to counter newspaper articles about it that were inaccurate and causing prejudice against the Native American. And this here is the recording of James Mooney's um, Ghost Dance. Now, the recordings were very rare in the late 1800s, and the way ethnographers and anthropologists would work is they would live with the tribe, and then they would learn the songs or dances, and then they would do them back to the tribe to have them say, okay, you did a good job, or no. This is how they would relay the information. And this recording is very likely James Mooney doing the chant. But he would have been taught it by the Native Americans, and the Native Americans were probably there observing it. So he recorded himself, and this is the recording. I'm just playing it because it's pretty cool. The ghost dance was it was a pan-indigenous practice that spread across multiple tribes, and each tribe performed it in their own unique way with their own unique herbs. It was not a religion. Some papers called it a religion that was spreading across the Native Americans. It was not a religion. It was a prayer, which makes it incredibly sad. It was a massive prayer that they would get their lands back. It was like a resurrection, and that makes it very sad. And how it started, a Paiute medicine man had a vision during a solar eclipse. He spoke with the creator. He saw the new world, and he saw how their native ancestors were alive and whole. And in this vision, he was taught this dance and this prayer that would bring the people back, that would give the natives back their land. It says that this vision of the ancestors returning and the natives getting back their land said it followed a period when many people had died as a result of contact with European diseases. A typhoid epidemic in 1867 may also have influenced the birth of this movement. Initially, Wadziwab, that's the medicine man, said that he saw some great cataclysm removing all the Europeans, leaving behind only Indians, after which those who faithfully practiced the spirituality of their ancestors would be miraculously returned. Ceremony that featured a communal circle dance was central to the spiritual practice suggested by these visions. While many European Americans were alarmed by the ghost dance and saw it as a militant and warlike movement, it was quite the opposite, an emergence of peaceful resistance movement based on Indian beliefs. It was also a movement of desperation. Existing treaties had been violated, and Indians in the West were forced onto reservations. For the Plains Indians, this was a period of starvation as the buffalo were slaughtered, destroying the way of life and main source of food. From an Indian point of view, Europeans were not only destroying the way of life of Indians, but by destroying the natural resources of the plains to an extent that would make it impossible for anyone to live there. European Americans often saw the ghost dance as irrational, From an Indian point of view, what was being done to them and their way of life was irrational. The press encouraged popular belief that the dance was dangerous and possibly a prelude to an Indian uprising. Mooney emphatically explained that it was peaceful. The translation of the prayer is, if we dance, our ancestors will return. The buffalo will return. The land will be restored, and the suffering will end. This is why it became a pan-indigenous symbol, just like the ghost dance became a pan-indigenous practice. First time white people heard really about smoke cleansing and white sage in that context, they weren't using it yet. That happened with the Don Juan books, which were written by a guy who submitted it as his PhD. It was his anthropological study, and the whole thing was fiction. The university that he got his PhD through completely renounced it. The book was by Carlos Castaneda, and it was about native shamanism. He fabricated this fictional um, sorcerer, native sorcerer guy who they called Don Juan. And in the book, they get these herb bundles and they use it for smoke cleansing and, purification and divination. Again, white people were not using white sage in any spiritual context at this time. From the Don Juan book, well, one of the passages where he talks about the white sage. Him and the native shaman guy says, we stopped next to a tall, slender bush whose color contrasted markedly with that of the surrounding vegetation. Chaparral around the bush was yellowish, but the bush was bright green. Now, the chaparral is like the thorny bushes around it. So the way this is described, it sounds like it's the white sage. Then he takes the white sage. It says, from this tree, this is what Don Juan is saying, from this tree you must take the leaves, took out his knife and chopped off the end of a thin branch. He chose another similar branch and also chopped off its tip. He repeated the operation until he had a handful of branch tips. And Don Juan says, look here, I have cut all the branches above the fork made by 2 or more leaves and the stem. Do you see? They are all the same. I have used only the tip of each branch where the leaves are fresh and tender. He took a long string from his pocket and tied it to the trunk and the lower branches of 2 bushes, making a kind of clothesline on which he hung the branch tips. So he is drying the sage. Don Juan says that the leaves must be left to dry in a place where it would be almost impossible to find them. After they have dried, they must be put in a bundle and sealed. These books, these books that were his PhD thesis get published, and that is when white people learn about this path to knowledge, this path to Native American knowledge. This was called the Thesis of Don Juan, and it was published in 1968. And what is 1968 on the cusp of? The 70s. What do we get in the 70s? We get a big influx of native magic, native tools, native ceremonies. Of course, white people didn't want to learn from the native people, so they got other white people teaching it, learning from the Don Juan books that were made up. Between the 70s and the 80s, this is where white sage gets commodified, sold, repackaged, not chopped gently at the tips of the leaves, as Don Juan had said, completely cut at the root. Into the 80s and 90s, where the occult scene is exploding, and authors like Scott Cunningham and others are using white sage, and I'll honestly say it was out of ignorance, not necessarily out of let's take this from the Native Americans. It was just the way things were flowing at that time. That is why I think it is really important, if we know this, if we know how we got from A to B, maybe we could just stop doing it. Please tell me, after knowing all of that, after knowing exactly why we use white sage in spirituality today, and why some Native Americans, not all, but some, especially the ones in the Western tribes, say don't use it, or you've got Native American practitioners online that are like, no, don't use it. I don't care if 10 of them say use it. If you've got 10 of them saying don't use it, why would you want to? Knowing what you know, why? How can you be a good spiritual practitioner? How can you be connected to your ancestors and connected to the land that we stand on now, knowing that that happened? And that is why we have white sage in our, in our stores and in our on our altars. And why? I'm of the opinion that those who use white sage who shouldn't, it will bring them nothing good. That's because the ancestors are furious. I don't use white sage not because I'm afraid of the ancestors, but because I care about how it got here. I care about the people that use it, that say don't use it. How can you learn any of this and want to use it? I don't understand. People suck.